Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Nature Connections Lunch and Learn series with Bucks County Audubon Society. We've got a great talk today with Bob McGarry, all the really wonderful climate change, climate watch through National Audubon Society. We're really excited. We've been doing this project for a couple of years, and it's showing some interesting results. So I'm excited to have Bob talk about it. Just as a sort of reminder of what's coming up, next week, hello again. I think I just disappeared for a minute. All about stream monitoring and our new stream monitoring program that my internet is very unstable. I apologize. So definitely it would be great if people wanted to check that out. We will be looking for volunteers for that program. And then of course, just my usual plugs, definitely come out to the property. There's lots of great stuff coming up in the woods, lots of flowers and trees are budding, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So definitely come outside. We have two programs coming up that I want to mention. One is our Birdathon, which is on the 15th. It's a great little competition. See how many different bird species you can count in within 24 hours. You can do it all over Bucks County if you want. You can do it in the section. You can do it right in your own backyard. We're pretty flexible on where you do things. But it should be lots and lots of fun. And then on the 13th and the 15th, we're also going to be exploring wildflowers. So on the 13th in the evening, we'll be doing a virtual introduction to wildflowers. And then on Saturday the 15th, Diane will be leading a hike to go out and look at some of the beautiful wildflowers that are in bloom right now. So lots of great stuff coming up. And hopefully everyone will be able to join us. I'm going to now turn this over to Bob McGarry and let him get going. And hopefully I won't get kicked out again. Thank you all so much.
So thanks for that great introduction. Sorry, I just had a bird outside my window. So it's migration. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a warbler or anything. It was a song sparrow. But anyway, like Stacy just said, I am Bob McGarry. I am the co-president of the board at the Bucks County Audubon Society, and I have been helping to run this ClimateWatch program since we got it up and running back in 2019. We started with the first count in 2019, which was in January. So I'll explain what that means, what the count is intended to do, how it's done, all of that as we go along. And I will share my screen now. All right, so can everybody see that? Excellent. So as a bit of background for ClimateWatch, obviously, as the name suggests, it is a citizen science program about climate change, tracking how birds are responding to climate change. Climate change is already having an effect on North American birds, and we know that as climate change accelerates, it's going to have a greater effect in the years to come. Back in 2014, the National Audubon Society published a peer-reviewed study that used computer models to determine how climate change over the coming decades is going to affect bird population and specifically bird habitats by 2080. What they did is, they used those computer models to track what habitat would remain for various species as climate change impacted those habitats and those ecosystems. So what they found was that 274 species of North American birds are what they call climate stable. As the name suggests, these are birds that shouldn't be impacted very much by climate change, at least in theory. They have habitat, they have ecological needs that are likely to be unaffected by climate change in the years to come. But there were 188 species that National Audubon called climate threatened. These are species that are likely to lose territory in their current territory, but have the potential to shift their range as time goes on. So these are species that maybe right now they breed in the northern United States, but as climate change progresses, they have the potential to, move their range into southern Canada or something along those lines. Then there are the climate endangered species. These are 126 species that are expected to lose habitat over the next couple of decades, but without any potential to shift to new territory. So their ranges are just, expected to, constrict until possibly, there's no territory left, no habitat that meets their ecological needs left on the continent. I remember back in 2014 reading the article that the National Audubon Society put, not their peer-reviewed one, but like the more user-friendly one that they published in their own magazine for their members. And I remember being struck by the fact that one species in particular, the Bayard sparrow, which lives in the northern Great Plains, was one of these climate endangered species that was expected to lose, potentially all of its habitat by 2080. So that would obviously be a really distressing circumstance. In total, 314 North American bird species are expected to be adversely affected by climate change in the near future. So ClimateWatch is a program that was set up in the wake of this study by National Audubon to verify the models that they used in this study to determine how birds are going to be affected by climate change. They started ClimateWatch in 2016, sort of beta testing it with a couple of chapters, and then they opened it to all interested chapters in 2018. And that's when we decided at Bucks Audubon that we were going to set up the ClimateWatch program, and we got it up and running for 2019, like I said. ClimateWatch uses volunteer observations to determine the accuracy of those climate models that I mentioned from the National Audubon study. And by refining, their predictions, by testing whether these climate models are accurate and, using that data to make even more accurate climate models, Audubon hopes to have a clearer idea of where birds are going to require habitat in the future so that we can, have the chance to conserve that habitat now and, start ensuring that birds, as many species as possible, will have the things that they need to thrive in the years to come, even as climate change becomes a bigger problem. So originally, the ClimateWatch program had two target species, which, it had two target families, I should say, Bluebirds and Nuthatches. I say families because, what we have here are the eastern bluebird and the white-breasted nuthatch. But obviously, these aren't the species of bluebird and nuthatch that are found all over North America. There are also mountain bluebirds, western bluebirds, pygmy nuthatches, brown-headed nuthatches. There's a variety. So in our neck of the woods, though, these are our two target species. So why were these the two target species? For one thing, they're familiar. Audubon wanted to make sure that ClimateWatch is a program that is user-friendly. It's open to everybody, regardless of their skill set. This isn't just for elite birders, experts, people with PhDs in ornithology. This is for anybody who wants to participate, anybody who cares about birds, has a passion for, fighting climate change, and wants to go out and help with this program. It's open to anybody, as long as you can tell what a bluebird or a nuthatch is. And I think most people who have a passing interest in birds are familiar with those two species. They're also charismatic and easy to find. You don't have to look too hard for them. They're not, sulking in the underbrush somewhere. They tend to be pretty noticeable in their habitat when they're present. They're found across the country in, one form or another. Like I just said, maybe it's not an eastern bluebird everywhere, but there are very few parts of the country that do not have native bluebird species. They are expected to undergo a range shift as a result of climate change. Like I said, those models that I was talking about, Some species are, like I said, climate stable. And if that's the case, if they're not expected to be impacted very much, you're not going to learn very much about how climate change is impacting birds if it's, not a species that is expected to be affected. So these are species that are likely to be affected in some way, and we're able to learn something more from studying them and from focusing on them. Audubon has since added similarly familiar species to the program, including goldfinches. But here in Bucks County, because we got started early and just about all of our squares were picked up first thing when bluebirds and nuthatches were the only game in town, those are the focus for us here in Bucks County. So right away, ClimateWatch began to shed light on how native birds are handling climate change. By comparing the volunteer observations against computer models, ClimateWatch is already uncovering how bird species are shifting into new habitat or not shifting, as the case may be. So what we have here is the computer model, the 2000 range for the white-breasted nuthatch, but also the likely range in 2080. So on the left here, you can see that most of the country was actually suitable habitat for white-breasted nuthatches in 2000, in the year 2000. And the current range is, outlined here on the computer model, but you can see that by 2080, there's a lot of potential for white-breasted nuthatches to breed in areas throughout Canada and Alaska that they weren't present in back in 2000. So this is a species that has the potential to shift north as climate change progresses. And trying to what I'm not sure what that slide was. I'm going to move on. So this is a chart for the Western bluebird. Obviously, Western bluebirds aren't our focus here in Bucks County, but this one is interesting because you can see that this is for winter. This is for the study that's conducted in the winter. And I'll explain more about the difference between the winter and the summer and how that impacts climate change, or rather ClimateWatch, as I go along. But this line is the probability that you can find the Western bluebird in a climate square, as we call them for ClimateWatch. That's the territory that a volunteer adopts and goes out and surveys. And on the left, that's the likelihood that a Western bluebird would be found in a square that is projected to become less suitable for it as the years go on. On the right, that's the likelihood that a Western bluebird will be found in a climate square that is going to improve in terms of its ecological potential for Western bluebirds as the years go on. And you can see the Western bluebird is a species that is already beginning to move into these squares that are likely to be better habitat for them as a result of climate change, and moving away from those that are becoming less suitable for them as a result of climate change. And this is a map of the Western bluebird range. The sections in yellow are the ones that are likely to become less suitable for them as the years go on. Blue are, areas that are supposed to become more suitable for them. And you can see that, this is a species that has a lot of potential to, move into these new areas. It's not expected to lose a ton of habitat, but it is apparently already being found more regularly in the areas where it has more potential. So this is a much more user-friendly chart that I found yesterday as I was preparing this. And this is for all of the bluebird and nuthatch species that are surveyed as part of the ClimateWatch program. And it just, very clearly says whether they are leaving sites that are worsening in climate suitability and moving into those that, are going to become more suitable for them as a result of climate change as the years go on. So you can see for the eastern bluebird in the summer, ClimateWatch is conducted twice a year, once in the winter, once in the summer. In the summer, eastern bluebirds are not leaving squares, at least yet, are not leaving those squares that are likely to become less suitable for them as a result of climate change. And we don't quite know how they're responding in the winter just yet. We need more data. And you can see the western bluebird, like we just saw on that other chart, is leaving those squares that are less suitable for them in the winter. And the white-breasted nuthatch, this is interesting. In the summer, it's not changing where it likes to be or where it has historically been. But in the winter, it is moving away from those squares that are worsening in climate suitability into those that are more suitable for it. So, if you'll think back to the definitions of the three categories that Audubon sorted bird species into for their study: climate stable, climate threatened, climate endangered. Climate threatened, that referred to the species that have the potential to move into new territory. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will move into that territory. And that's what ClimateWatch is, one of the things ClimateWatch is uncovering, both whether the models are accurate and how these particular species on the ground actually reflect those models. Because just because a species has the potential to move into new habitat doesn't mean that they are. So these are the two variables that ClimateWatch is sort of studying. More recently, this was published last year. You can see the 2000 copy right there up in the upper left corner. We're not going to go too deep into this right now. But if you look at the title of this paper, this was a peer review paper published by the National Audubon Society. Community science validates climate suitability projections from ecological niche modeling. In other words, climate change is validating the climate models from the 2014 study that we discussed at the beginning of this presentation. So, while we don't have all the data just yet for every species, we don't know, whether the eastern bluebird is successfully moving into more climate suitable climate squares in the winter. We do know that in general, the results of the study are being validated, are being verified by the on the ground, observations of our ClimateWatch volunteers. So that is pretty cool. It means what we're doing is worthwhile and producing valuable scientific data. So how to conduct a ClimateWatch survey. You have a photo here of somebody conducting one. I had permission to use this person's likeness, so I went ahead and did that. But in general, as some basic background information, ClimateWatch is conducted twice a year. Once in the winter, which is January 15th through February 15th, and a second time in the summer, or what we call the summer. It's really entirely within the spring season. It's May 15th through June 15th, but these species that we're talking about, that we're looking for, this is their breeding season. So for the birds, it's summer. We call it summer. ClimateWatch takes place in 10 by 10 kilometer climate squares. There are about 18 of these in Bucks County. I'll show you a map of them in just a few minutes. Each volunteer is responsible for surveying 12 points within that square for one of the target species. And every square is associated with either an expected gain or loss in climate suitability for the resident species. So if you look at this map, this is a map of Bucks County, and these are the climate squares. This is specifically the map for white-breasted nuthatch. This is how, and while the squares are identical for eastern bluebird in terms of their geographic area, they don't have a different grid for each species. Each species is either, they have different projections in terms of whether they are going to gain in climate suitability in that region or lose climate suitability. So this blue area, same as that map we were looking at earlier for the western bluebird, blue means they are likely to gain climate suitability here. So white-breasted nuthatch, Bucks County is looking pretty good for it, at least between now and 2080. And if you look at eastern bluebird, this is the map of the eastern bluebird for Bucks County in the summer. It's looking pretty similar. You'd have to really look at the nitty-gritty to notice the minor difference between the two. If you look down here, you could notice that right there, kind of on the border between Philadelphia and New Jersey, the white-breasted nuthatch is expected to have no change, whereas the eastern bluebird is expected to have an increase in climate suitability in that square. But that's obviously getting into the weeds. Overall, they both have pretty good forecasts here, at least for the white-breasted nuthatch year-round and eastern bluebird in the summer. That said, different species have different ecological needs between seasons. So if you look at the eastern bluebird climate suitability projections here in Bucks County for the winter, it's a slightly different story. Most of the county isn't projected to experience a significant change. There's one square here in Bucks County that is projected to improve in suitability for the eastern bluebird. But then throughout the upper part of the county, there are several squares that are projected to decrease in suitability for the eastern bluebird. So this is, like I said, this reflects how, if you think back to the results that we have so far, we know that the eastern bluebird is not moving into better habitat or changing its habitat during the summer months, and we don't have enough information to make a projection about the winter just yet. And this reflects why we don't quite know that just yet. There are different needs for the species in different seasons, and we need more data to figure out exactly what's going on at different parts of the year. But if you're conducting a ClimateWatch survey, you don't need to take too much, or rather, you don't need to think too much about whether the square is projected to, improve or get worse for a given species. You just need to pick a square or be assigned one or get on a waiting list. Back in the early days of ClimateWatch here in Bucks County, when a lot of squares were available, it was a lot easier to pick one and get one that was close to where you lived. Right now, all the squares are claimed. So if you are interested in participating, it's totally possible to get on a waiting list. Squares do open up. People decide, oh, I'm not interested in, volunteering with this anymore. I'm too busy with other things. Or sometimes people just can't even participate in a given season. They might be out of town for the whole winter, or obviously more recently there have been concerns around participating during COVID. So occasionally there's the need for substitute surveyors. So it's totally possible to get involved, even if you don't officially have your own square. And of course, if you're participating, then you'll be the first one to get an email when there is a square available. Second, decide on your target species. It's easier also to decide on your target species if the survey hasn't been conducted in that square before. Right now, the fact that we have conducted surveys in most of these squares, it's usually better if you can just pick up and survey for that same species that we've already been looking for in that climate square. You choose 12 survey points within the square that are good habitat for that species, or again, if you're picking up a square for somebody else, you go to the 12 survey points that they chose, and survey points need to be at least 200 meters apart from each other, so that it's less likely that you're double counting birds. And while the points do not need to be evenly distributed throughout the 10-kilometer square, you should consider, how you're planning to travel between them when you're choosing those points. Obviously, if you're planning to walk around a park, you might need to keep them in a pretty constrained area, but you can spread them out a bit if you're planning to drive between the points. So Audubon's website has a ClimateWatch planner, which is a GIS-powered mapping tool that you can use to plot your points and make sure that they are all equidistant, or not equidistant, but suitably distant from each other. But you're also able to use more low-tech methods of plotting your points. You can just, sort of guesstimate and make sure that they are, at least 200 meters apart. You can kind of eyeball it. But if you are using a low-tech method, it is important that you record the longitude and latitude of your points in decimals. So you'd have to have an app on your phone or some other way of getting those coordinates to make sure that you can submit that data accurately. Survey conditions, they're conducted once per square per count period, so that's twice a year, once in the winter, once in the summer, as we call it, even if it's really the spring. They should be conducted as close to sunrise as possible and ideally completed by noon. If something happens and you're not able to complete the survey in the morning during the count period, the late afternoon is a backup option, but given the fact that there are 30 full days to conduct that survey, usually it should be possible to find a time to do it in the morning. You should avoid surveying on days with heavy precipitation or strong winds because it can make it harder to, observe the birds. It also is far less pleasant to be out on days with bad weather like that. Just speaking personally, I definitely prefer to find the days with nice weather. So avoid those. And surveys should be conducted with no more than 3 individuals per party to limit distraction. That was the original rule. Obviously, in today's world, we have to take social distancing into account. So most of our volunteers have been, conducting this either just within their, families or on their own to make sure that we are conducting these safely in the time of COVID. If an interruption occurs, you can consider starting over. Obviously, it'd have to be a pretty big interruption. You'd really have to start over. Usually it's possible to fit it into a morning because you're only spending 5 minutes at each of those survey sites. So that is the first bullet point on this next slide. They are stationary and they last for 5 minutes. So what you do is you get to that point that you have selected as a survey point, and you can put a timer on your phone, just stand there for 5 minutes and make a checklist of every bird that you see or hear at that point. during those 5 minutes. That's done at every single one of those 12 survey points. You keep a separate checklist for each of those points. And to the extent possible, you should return to the same points for each count cycle. This is, this is so that the data is reliable and that, it's better for the data quality. Obviously, going to the same points every time, it adds some consistency. The points are in habitat that are suitable for your target species. So if we're going back to those same habitats twice a year, we get a better idea of how those birds are responding to climate change and how climate change is affecting those habitats. As I mentioned earlier, you track every bird that you see or hear, not just the target species and the number of each species. We don't use calls or audio lures. So, even though, it's really easy to pull up an app on your phone and play, an Eastern Bluebird call, if that's the species that you're looking for. We don't do that because it can skew the data. And if you remain birding at the spot for more than 5 minutes, the data that you submit to Audubon should only include those birds that you find in the first 5 minutes of your results. So if you're using eBird, which we'll talk about in a minute or two, that's one option for how to submit your data. It's totally fine if you want to keep birding for more than 5 minutes at your survey point. I know that I personally this past winter had a survey point that there was just a whole lot of avian activity. There was a huge flock of waxwings, and there were some yellow-rumped warblers, and I wanted to stick around and get a chance to look through those. But it was important to make sure that the data that I was submitting to Audubon was limited to that 5-minute count period. Like I said, eBird is a great option for submitting your results. And one of the reasons why I really like using eBird as opposed to one of the other data submitting options, which I'll talk about in a minute, is that eBird is its own citizen science program. And it's nice to, put that data, the data that you're collecting, out in as many places where it might be useful to ornithologists as possible. And it's so using eBird allows the puts that data right into the eBird database, as well as the database that Audubon is keeping for its ClimateWatch results. And I think that it increases the value of the effort that you're putting in, just allowing people to use the data for multiple projects. So what you have to do if you're using eBird is submit a separate eBird checklist for each of your 12 points. Not gonna go into the details of how to do that today, but it should be easy to find a help guide on eBird's website if you don't already know how to do that. You can use the eBird app on your phone while you're actually out in the field to record the longitude and latitude for you. Like I said, that is something that you have to make sure that you do for data submitting purposes. And the eBird app takes care of that for you. It's another convenient reason to use eBird. And you do have to, when you're submitting the checklist, name your target species, note the presence of any feeders or birdhouses, and record the number of observers that were with you in your checklist comments. You also have to make sure that your checklist comments are public if you're doing that, because obviously when you send your checklist to Audubon, those comments need to be public for them to read them. You can also use the eBird website. You don't need to use the app on your phone, but if you are using the website, you're going to run into that situation that somehow you're going to have to get the longitude and latitude from some other source. And that's to make sure that you are submitting those checklists from the exact locations that you survey, not the hotspot. For example, let's say you were surveying the square that includes Bucks Audubon's Honey Hollow Nature Center. And if you were at Honey Hollow conducting the ClimateWatch survey, you wouldn't want to submit that checklist from the overall Honey Hollow hotspot, which is an option on eBird. You'd want to make sure that you were submitting it from the exact longitude and latitude where you were standing. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're using the website as opposed to the app, which kind of takes care of that for you. After that, if you've gotten your 12 checklists together on eBird, whether you were using the app or you were using the website, you get the URLs for each of those checklists, put them in a email and send that off to ClimateWatch@audubon.org. And you should also copy your coordinator here in Bucks County. That would be me, just so your coordinator can keep track of who's actually finished their counts, who's gotten their results in, and they know who to bug about getting the rest of their counts in. The other options, there is a Audubon smartphone app. There's a screenshot there on the right, what that home screen for that app looks like. They actually have a checklist function during the ClimateWatch season that you can create a checklist right in their app and send that directly to them. I haven't tried doing that yet, but I do like their app in general. I think it has a good field guide, and one nice part of it is, it has the calls for every species in the guide right there in their entry. So that is one of the advantages that an app has over a book. It can include the bird songs more easily. You don't have to transliterate them or anything. There's also a form on Audubon's website that can be used to submit the checklists, and there's also a paper option. But I don't know anybody who's done the paper option. It says that you send them to Audubon and that they will digitize them as funds and like man hours allow. So that is probably not the best choice. That's a sort of method of last resort for people who want to participate but do not have the technological capacity to use any of the other options. So to sum up, ClimateWatch surveys are conducted twice a year, once during the winter and once during the May 15th to June 15th period that we call the summer. You are allowed to vary your survey points between winter and summer to be in the most seasonably appropriate habitat for that species, but you should try to keep them as consistent as possible. Survey points must remain the same within each season, and if they need to be changed, the new survey points should be located as near as possible to the previous survey points. So like I was saying earlier, it's best to keep these things as consistent as possible, both between seasons and between years. But every once in a while, you do run into a situation where let's say a park is just closed or something. You can't get into a place where you've previously surveyed, or this past winter there was a big problem with all the snow we were having. I know that some of my points I couldn't access as easily because of parking lots being snowed in, things like that. And when that happens, you just choose a new point as close as possible to the previous point. So are there any questions? Happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Bob. So definitely, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or we're a small group if you want to unmute yourself. Diane did put one in the chat.
Okay.
I think she was referring to when you had up the maps about just how different some of the squares are. Do we have an idea of why some of the squares, even the ones that are right next to each other, are different?
Diane, did you mean for like the Eastern Bluebird winter season map where
there was an orange and a blue right next to each other? It's like They're right next to each other. How can they be so different?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. My personal guess would be it has something to do with land use within the square. You know, perhaps you know, one square has more fields or something in it that are likely to remain good eastern bluebird habitat. Maybe another one has really limited fields, a lot more forest cover, or, you know, like urban development that, you know, it's not as likely to be good bluebird habitat in the future. But it is a good question, and I don't know for sure. That would be my best guess, though.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Bob? This is a really, really great program. And this is actually part, as many of the programs that we've been talking about in this series, is part of our community science committee, helps to oversee them. And then we have key point people like Bob who sort of take on each project. So this is one that we've been doing for a couple of years, and it's been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of great volunteers that have been coming out and helping us do this project. So we're excited to be a part of it. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions for Bob, reminder to everybody, next Wednesday is all about stream monitoring and about the stream monitoring program that we'll be starting at Bucks Audubon. And definitely if you have time and want to sign up, we've got a lot of other fun things happening, including our birdathon on May 15th, as well as our wildflower programs on the 13th and the 15th. And then we also have a forest bathing coming up on the 22nd. So there's lots of different wonderful things going on. So hopefully everyone will come out and join us for some of those. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And I hope everyone has a really, really great week.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you all for coming today.